Hello and welcome to this month's monthly webinar provided to you by Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation. My name is Michael Kramer. I am the Calibration/Inspection Program Manager at PJLA. Today's webinar, Tuesday, November 20th, will be in regards to the revised 17025 2017 standard. We're going to look at section 8.8, which is the section on internal audits. So as always, this webinar is being recorded. If you have a colleague that may have missed it on our PJLA website, we do have on the toolbar a tab which says webinars. So shortly after we're finished with today's session, this one will be available, and it's entirely on our website, along with various others that we've done over the last couple years. We started something new at the last webinar. So those of you folks that wasn't here last month when we went over management reviews, you may recall that at the end of the webinar, we will allow the opportunity for you all to ask questions, and we muted ourselves. Questions were funneled into me. It's more real time now, so we sort of streamlined the process. You should have during any time during the course of this presentation, if a question does arise, feel free to type it in. At the conclusion, I will be able to not go mute for 5 minutes, but I will see should be able to see all the submitted questions and should be able to review them without the 5-minute pause there to submit questions that we used to do. Excuse me. So without further ado, let's just dive into section 8.7, internal audits. Internal audits is part of the management system requirements, which is section 8. That's option A. So everything under section A, you see this option AB, internal audits falls under option A. We discussed that A and B at a webinar not that long ago, but basically, if you are not 9001 registered or certified, this will be assessed and audited just like all the other sections. Section B would be for those folks that are also operating under a 9001 quality management system, that these requirements should be caught during that process in your quality management system. Hence, if currently it's up to the accreditation bodies as to the extent that we have to look at those. But for option A, if you folks are not 9001, it's going to be assessed just like the rest of the standard, and should be subjected, of course, to the internal audit. So in a nutshell, the principles behind the internal audit remains the same. Section 414 in the 2005 standard. I specify this quite often during my webinars. At the 2017, I like to use the word less prescriptive. It's less prescriptive than the 2005. It offers the organization more flexibility. So in 2005, it was very specific that the internal audit was the responsibility of the quality manager. The new standard, however, no longer specifies this and simply requires personnel to be authorized for given tasks. So we'll look at that here in a little bit. The standard now also requires that the results of previous audits to be taken into account and that the criteria and scope for each audit be defined. Look at those requirements as well. In 2005 and in 2017, exactly how often do you have to do an internal audit? What's required? In 2005, there was a note, which is a recommendation that specifies that the internal audit should normally be done within a year. That note has disappeared in the 2017 standard. The lab established the plan intervals and need to comply with it. I specify here the plan interval. It does, like I said, there's just no requirement to do it annually, to do it every 6 months. I believe it needs to be reasonable, and it could be tied into under the section in improvements under 823. Laboratory management shall provide evidence of commitments to the development and implementation of the management system and continually improving its effectiveness. So I think it sort of can be tied into that requirement as far as anything going beyond a year as far as doing the internal audits. But 2017, as in 2005, there was no requirement as to how often this had to be done. Even the note from the 2005 that recommended the 1 year interval has been removed. So looking directly at the standard and the requirements, the laboratory shall conduct internal audits at planned intervals to provide information on whether the management system, A, conforms to the laboratory's own requirements for its management system, including the laboratory activities, and the requirement of this document being the 17025 standard. So a little play on words there. 2005 was predetermined schedule. 2017 is at plan intervals. And the lab has total flexibility on how they want to do the internal audit. It can be all concluded at one time. However, it needs to follow the planned interval established by the lab, and it needs to cover all activities over a reasonable period of time. It may be inconvenient to audit all activities in a single audit. It can be spread over, for example, over several quarterly or monthly audits, perhaps assign different parts of the quality management system for each quarter. Could be monthly, whatever works best for your organization. The schedule of audits can be conveniently drawn as part of a matrix, sort of depict a simplified matrix there at the bottom of the screen. For example, a year in which the dates are set for each part of the quality system. So the laboratory shall provide information on whether, still here on section 881, on when we're stating whether the management system conforms to the laboratory owner's requirements for its management system, including the laboratory activities. What we're looking at there is I have a depiction there of a quality manual. You may have even though it's not required, I know several organizations are still going to utilize a quality manual and document their quality management system in a tiered structure. So basically, the quality manual is stating how the lab and organization is going to comply with their own requirements, comply with the requirements of the standards. So basically, it's stated there, words are meaningless without the intent and follow through. So basically, the internal audit should cover the lab's own quality management system and assure the lab is doing exactly as they're stating in their, say, for example, in a quality manual or an internal quality administrative procedure. And to provide information on whether the management conforms with the requirement of this document. As I've stated previous, that means the requirements of 17025. So you're going to assure compliance to your own quality management system and assure you're meeting the requirements of 17025. And still on 881, continue to provide information on whether the management system B is effectively implemented and maintained. In other words, ideally, of course, you're doing the internal audit. The standard is a requirement for 17025. You're going to audit your system for compliance to your own quality management system and that of 17025. Ideally, should be effectively implemented, and during the course of the internal audit, opportunities for improvement ideally would arise. Okay, continuing 87, excuse me, this is actually section 88, error there on the slides. 882, the laboratory shall plan, establish, implement, and maintain an audit program, including the frequency, methods, responsibility, requirements, and reports, which shall take into account the importance of laboratory's activities concerned, changes affecting the laboratory, and the results of previous audits. Hence, that results of previous audits. That's an addition. So those folks that I highlighted there, an audit program, 2000, and we're going to see the requirements from 2005 here in a little bit. Basically stated you had to have a procedure. But you can still use a procedure and fulfill the requirement. The procedure can be utilized as an audit program. So there's the same requirements from the 2005 standard. I have bolded a couple terms here that are different. We have an audit program in lieu of a procedure. And then the responsibility of the quality manager. That's no longer a requirement in the 2017 standard. That would have to be somebody authorized by the laboratory. Okay, yes. Clause 8882, the laboratory shall define the audit criteria and the scope of the audit. So what is that saying? The audit criteria, that is the set of policies, procedures, or requirements. Note, an audit criteria are used as reference against which audit evidence is compared. So basically what the scope is would be the who, what, where, and when, and the criteria is what you are auditing against, whether the standard, international procedures, technical procedures, your own quality management system. (882)C, ensuring the results of the audit are reported to relevant management. So this is, in addition, one thing I brought up here is earlier in the standard, it specifies here relevant management, and under the structural requirements, the laboratory shall identify management that has overall responsibility for the laboratory. I would take that person, whoever the lab has identified, as the individual having responsibility for the overall responsibility for the laboratory, would be relevant. 882C, those results are to be reported to relevant management. 882C, nothing new here. The laboratory shall implement appropriate correction and corrective action without undue delay. Always been required if you had a finding during the internal audit, a nonconformance, that you had to take corrective action. So what this is saying is appropriate immediate correction, fix the problem at hand, carry it through to corrective action. That would be the full-blown process of assuring that it doesn't happen again. The correction could be the Band-Aid for the instance at hand. Taking full-blown corrective action would be, for example, the full root cause analysis, taking corrective action to address the root cause to assure that the nonconformance does not reoccur. Always been required, the laboratory shall retain records as evidence of the implementation of the audit program and the audit results. So have to basically show what was done, create a record, audit report, audit checklist, a combination of the two, ideally with objective evidence that was reviewed, and determine whether or not compliance was met or perhaps not met. Okay, there's a note as far as it's a relatively short section. A note references 17011 as a guidance document for internal audits. It's an international standard that sets forth guidelines and management system auditing. It is developed by the International Organization of Standardization. So one thing you may have noticed was not actually under the requirements here for internal audits. However, it is embedded in the standard. So from 2005, there was a requirement as to who needs to carry out the internal audit. The internal audit shall be carried out by trained and qualified personnel who are, wherever resources permit, independent of the activities being audited. We did not see that. However, under the section of in personnel, when it refers to in personnel laboratory activities, that's all personnel involved in activities that could influence laboratory activities. Hence, when it talks about impartiality and competence, it's not just those folks that are generating the calibration or testing data and generating the reports for your clients. This would also include the internal auditors. So I've carried forth a couple of requirements here from personnel that would be also applicable to the internal auditors. So looking at these requirements, and this is all personnel of the laboratory, internal, external, that could influence the laboratory activities, shall act impartially, be competent, and work in accordance with the laboratory management system. So we have two things over there, and that can correlate to the 2005 requirements as far as trained and independence. We're talking here specified competence and also the impartiality requirement here in 621. So even under personnel who would determine the competence of the internal auditors, that would be the laboratory. So under 625, I took a couple of the requirements here for records under personnel. So even with your internal auditors, the laboratory shall have procedures and maintain records for determining the competence requirements. And then the authorization of personnel. Hence, if you're doing your internal audit internally, you have assigned somebody within your staff. Let's say you still are utilizing a quality manager. That person is doing your internal audits. The laboratory has to show under 625 that the individual is authorized by the laboratory to conduct the internal audit. Just in the same manner as your various testing and calibration activities, you have to authorize specific folks that are qualified and deemed competent to perform specific testing calibration. Sort of make the correlation there in respect to the internal auditor. So that's it for the requirements. Just some general overview, some good practices here concerning internal auditing. One thing for offsite testing or calibration, where an organization is accredited for calibration or testing at the client sites. You're packing up your equipment, your standards, you're going on site to do the your customers, and you're doing testing and calibration work right there on those premises. They need to be part of the internal audit. That's subjected to review by the internal auditors. There's specific requirements there pertaining to on-site calibration in regards to perhaps a deviation from any environmental conditions that could be in effect, the packing and the transport of the equipment and the standard that's assuring they're being done and maintaining the integrity of perhaps their traceability and their operation to perform any specific test. Another just general information, and I actually had an organization feel that, hey, you're doing a better job of this than we are. We're just going to use your audit as our internal audit. No, that's audits carried out by other parties, such as, say, your accreditation body or perhaps the customers. That shall not be considered as a substitute for internal audits. I'm sure most everyone here is probably well aware of that, but thought I'd just bring it to light here during this webinar. So some good general practice for internal auditors. The key steps of an internal audit are planning, investigation, analysis, reporting, and follow-up corrective action, and of course, closeout. I'm sorry. Conduct an opening meeting. This can vary, of course, depending on the size of the organization. You could be a testing or calibration lab, which is part of a larger organization. We have organizations that are two people organizations that are 17025. So ideally, an opening meeting should be conducted, and if needed, introduce members. You may have an audit team. Confirm the audit criteria. What are you going to be audited again? What are you auditing? You're auditing compliance to the standard, to the quality management system. Review the scopes, what, who, when, where is going to be audited. Clarify any relevant details in regards to the audit program and timetable. Ask questions while gathering objective evidence. Ask questions. Observe activities. Examine facilities and examine records. Auditors should make use of the quality management system documents, i.e. things such as quality manual, test methods, work instructions. Use those as reference standards and verify that the lab is what the lab is stating is exactly what's being done is actually the case. Objective evidence. The auditor should review objective evidence that the management system requirements are being filled. Objective evidence should be collected as efficiently and effectively as possible. Objective evidence may include things such as if you're still utilizing a master documents list, customer contracts, customer feedbacks, purchasing documents, approved vendors lists, corrective and preventive action reports, management reviews, previous internal audits, personnel training records, customers test or calibration reports, calibration certificates for standards and equipments, proficiency testing results, uncertainty budgets, environmental monitoring data are all examples of actual objective evidence. I can tell a good internal audit when I see good objective evidence that was being looked at. May see an internal audit that was simply a checklist that didn't cross-reference to the quality management system. We will produce traceable results It's addressed in a specific section within the quality management system. Sure, your system was written to comply with the standard. You put in your system how you're going to comply with the standard. The objective evidence is you actually look at the real live animals. Are they actually being done in accordance of what the standard is, what is being required, and what is stating in the organization's own quality management system. So in other words, the internal audit is much more than a checklist against the quality management system. It's actually looking at referring to the term real live animals. We have a section on improvement, customer feedback. Should be, for example, the lab has to seek it, has to analyze it. Is that being done? Actually going back, reviewing. I'm just using customer feedback as an example. Yes, your quality management system may state you're going to do customer surveys, for example, and send them out on an annual basis. Okay, the objective evidence is actually looking at the actual survey forms and assuring that you're actively seeking feedback and it is effective and you are getting that feedback. Also have a tidbit at the bottom. Objective evidence can also be considered as anything which is heard, seen, or read, which was evidence in supporting whether or not compliance was met. For example, if you were in the lab where the testing and calibration activities were being undertaken, there's specific requirements for controlled access of those areas. So let's say, for example, if you were in there and the UPS man came in and put the box down unauthorized, that's subjective evidence that access is not being controlled. All audit findings should be recorded. Any nonconformance should be noted and investigated further by the auditor to identify underlying problems. In other words, if you do find a nonconformance as an internal auditor, you might want to dig deeper. If you looked at one report, you found an issue with a specific test report or a calibration certificate, may warrant digging a little bit deeper, maybe looking and seeing if it's an ongoing issue. One thing as an assessor, our disclaimer at PJLA is it's a sampling process. We're not going to look at every report that you do, every report that was generated, perhaps not look at every individual's training record. If we do find an issue while we're doing our sampling process, it may set off a light that, hey, perhaps we need to look at this a little bit deeper. This may be an ongoing issue. So if you have a finding from one piece of objective evidence that may warrant perhaps digging a little bit deeper, see if it's ongoing. After all activities have been completed, the audit team should review and analyze all findings to determine which are to be reported as non-conformance and which can be included as recommendations for improvement. So with a non-conformance, the way I like to state it is there's got to be a requirement that's associated with it. So if you have a finding, potential non-conformance, you have to find within, say, the standard or even your own quality management system, a requirement that you placed on yourself. You have to find the actual requirement in the evidence that it's actually not being fulfilled. Recommendations for improvements could be how things perhaps, and that's the way we write at PJLA observations. We sort of put those, preface those as opportunities for improvement. Perhaps there's not a specific requirement that's not being fulfilled. However, there could be recommendations here to improve perhaps how compliance is being met. The audit team, if you have a team or even an individual internal auditor, should prepare a clean, concise report supported by objective evidence of nonconformance and recommendations for improvements. Again, nonconformist should be identified in terms of specific requirements of the organizations for a quality manual here or any other related documents under which the audit has been concluded. Good practices to put the audit to bed. Closing meeting with the senior management or that individual, perhaps, that has overall responsibility for the laboratory. And those responsible for the functions audited should be held for the main purpose of meeting as a presentation of the audit findings and to report to management in a manner in which they understand the audit results. Purpose of this meeting is to present audit findings and report to top management in such a manner as to ensure that they clearly understand the results of the audit. Observations or recommendations for improvement. The lead auditor should present observations taking into account their perceived significance. Both positive and negative aspects of the operation should be presented. So I find as an internal, if you're doing an internal audit, or even at PJLA, we call them assessments. We don't refer to them as audit. We do an external, we're doing your external audit, we refer to them as assessment. Internal audits, should not just be utilized as a tool to perhaps bang things that are not compliant, bad elements of the quality management system. It's also a good opportunity to present particularly good aspects of the quality management system and the operation of the lab. I personally, and you may have heard this, like to start out with the positive aspects. From there, perhaps lead into any findings or nonconformances that were found during the internal audit. The lead auditor should present the audit team's conclusions regarding the quality management system, conformity with all audit criteria, and the conformity of the operations to the management system. Any nonconformances identified during an internal audit should be noted, any appropriate corrective action, and the time frame for corrective and agreed with the auditee are recorded. Hence, you have some findings. You have to implement corrective action. Recommended that you have a time frame. You have a period that corrective action should be taken, and perhaps give it some leeway to determine whether or not it was effective. I recommend that if you're having a closing meeting, informing top management of the audit results. We circulate attendance forms at PJLA that the records of a closing meeting should be kept. So if you do have any findings during your internal audit, whenever a nonconformance, particularly if it brings into question the results of calibration or test is discovered, the corresponding activity should be halted until the appropriate corrective action has been taken or has been shown to lead to unsatisfactory results. In addition, the results may have affected by the nonconformity should be investigated. Then customers informed of the validity of corresponding calibration or test reports is in doubt. So in other words, if an internal audit could perhaps shed light on some non-conforming testing or calibration work. Work could have been performed and the non-conformance identified potentially impacted the results of those tests and perhaps other tests that were performed. Hence, the procedure for non-conforming testing or calibration work would need to be followed. So if formal corrective action is needed, the procedure should be followed to reveal the root cause and some problems and to implement effective corrective and improvements. The auditor should check the effectiveness of corrective action after the agreed time frame has elapsed. Designated personnel should have the ultimate responsibility for confirming the clearance of nonconformity by the auditee and then closing them out. So hence you have a time frame for corrective action. Took corrective action, let some time pass, assure that the corrective action has been effective, and then officially close them out. So again, even keep records of your internal audits, keep records of any objective evidence that you have looked at during the course of the internal audit. Each of the nonconformists that has identified should be recorded, detailing the nature, the possible causes, corrective action requirement, and appropriate time frames for their clearances. A final report should be prepared. Summarize the outcome of the audit. Could utilize a checklist. I see checklists utilized often, corresponding to the specific clauses in the standard. Supplement that with a final report. Things such as the name of the auditors, the date of the audit, the areas that were audited, the details of all areas examined, the positive and good aspects of the operations, any nonconformists identified, link to reference and reference those nonconformists to the relevant document, i.e. 17025 or say an internal document within your quality management system. Any recommendations for improvement, corrective action agreed, the time frame agreed for completion, and the person responsible for carrying out the action. Any corrective action taken, the date of confirmation and completion of corrective action, and a signature of the designated personnel conforming closeout of the corrective action. Just preface here, we went over in 882C, ensure the results of audits are reported to relevant management. Okay, this will bring the end of the formal presentation. Bear with me one moment here. Yep, I'm sorry about the typo. 87, of course, that is a section on corrective action. That is, should have been 88 referenced on the top of the slides. I did, was referenced the right clauses, must have accidentally put that in there and carried it forward. And I ought to take corrective action on myself because I did not notice that until the very end, or excuse me, till I got in the presentation. Don't know if I could change it right now without actually recording. If anyone here would like a copy of this presentation, of course, the non-recorded version, I will, as soon as we close off, I'm going to make that correction on my slides, reference 88 instead of 87. My email address is mkramer, that's Kramer, at pjlabs, that's with an S at the end, .com. Send me an email. I will make this correction. I'll be more than happy to send that back to you. Okay, hopefully, and also make reference to that email address. This is the only question I really had submitted here. So hopefully I really got the point across, or perhaps there's not a whole lot of differences here. So it's presented in a different type of language, but the overall requirement between the 2005 2017, I believe the principles and everything are still intact. Another question here. Should an observation be part of the internal audit? Observation should most definitely be part of the internal audit. An observation is a recommendation for improvement. So like I said before, any recommendations for improvement, any non-conformances, or particularly good aspects of the organization that presented itself during the internal audit should be part of your internal. Is PJLA going to provide a checklist for internal audits? We actually do have on our website right now, we are actually assessing to the 2017. We're going through a transition period. So we always had we call it a working document, you can refer to it as a checklist for the 2005, and it's under forms. It's an LF56, probably 2017. We still have the 2005 there, but yes, the actual working document that our assessors use is available on our website, pjlabs.com. Have to go to the resources forms section, and it's actually an Excel format currently, the 2017 working document. Sure. Can notes taken during external audits be considered an internal audit? It's kind of specific there during the slides here that the external audit is separate. By all means, take as many notes as you want to during the external audit, but the internal audit is independent of any external audits that's being done, say by a customer or by your accrediting body. Is an audit schedule required for internal auditing? It's got to be done at planned intervals. So a schedule can be, of course, correlated to a planned interval. I'm not sure exactly what your question here is. Scheduling, I went over an example of how you can do different sections of the say your own quality management system on a quarterly basis. If that's what you're referring to, no, that's not required. It totally depends on what works for you. I find it being done both ways. So if you're a small organization, perhaps doing say you're going to do an internal audit on an annual basis, that's perfectly fine. That's your planned interval is the way I look at that. Or it might be more convenient for you to do it quarterly or monthly. If you do a good job during an internal audit, you're a large organization, you want to look at a lot of objective evidence, ensure you're meeting compliance, and perhaps find some opportunities for improvement. The quarterly system may work better, but there's no requirement that you have to do it on a schedule like that. You have to do it as stated in the standard. You have to establish a planned interval. So the one, we have a section on risk. How is the concept of risk in 2017 ISO document applied to internal auditing? Well, there's requirements. There's a whole section on new section on risk. So you're going to audit that. So that's going to be part of your audit. If you're asking me what is the risk that's associated with an internal audit, let's say your planned interval, and I gave an example of It's not specific. It needs to be done every year. It was recommended in 2005. If you say you're going to do it every 2 years, for example, you have to show commitment by top management. Yeah, I would be looking at perhaps the risk associated with that. I'm hoping I'm answering your question there, but directly pertaining to the internal audit, yes, you're going to look at risk because there's requirements. There's requirements that's going to have to be met there. There's requirements in the standard. If you're asking me the risk of the actual requirements for internal audits, it's not embedded in there. But if you're going to look at, say, I just gave the example of extending the plan interval, perhaps the risk should be looked at in that particular case. So should a nonconformance and observation be separate in reporting the internal audit or external audit? When we do your assessments, of course, we do a separate report. If there's nonconformance, we clearly identify the requirement that wasn't being met, a broad aspect of the finding, and then we also list the objective evidence. What we actually saw, or perhaps seen that prompted us to write the nonconformance. So there's a should there. I would think it's probably best to maybe extract your nonconformances and record them separately. Identify them in your report, your checklist, or whatever you're using. But that's not required. But as specified in the sections on guideline, you should identify what requirement wasn't being met and what objective evidence you saw to prompt you to write the nonconformance that showing that this specific identified requirement was not being met. Is there a risk to engage a third party to do an internal audit for our company? Well, ideally, you're going to fulfill the requirement of impartiality there, we hope. It totally depends on who you're going to get externally do your internal audit. One thing, bear in mind, confidentiality. So your external auditor may be going into other organizations. You want to assure that any information they find in your laboratory is strictly confidential. 17025, of course, it's is an area which we look at the technical competencies of the organization. We actually go in and look at watch your folks do what they do best, the testing and calibration activities in which you're accredited for. So perhaps a risk would be whoever you employ as a external source to do your internal audit, just assure are they versed in the testing and calibration activities that they engage in. I do a lot of assessments. I do calibration labs. I don't do all calibration labs because I'm not versed in every type of calibrations. And I would not go out. Let's say, for example, cannabis. That's a big testing area for us. I'm not familiar with it. I've never been involved with it. I can do 17025, but if I'm actually watching what those folks do best, I would not consider myself qualified to assess those aspects of the organization. I hope I answered your question there concerning a third-party internal auditor. Bear with me. I'm fishing through these questions. This is live TV. I started out with one. Then I got quite a few of them. I said real time, so hopefully these things were coming in real time and just didn't all populate here at the end. corrective action need to be initiated during the audit as they are observed or after the completion of the audit. If you have a finding during an internal audit, corrective action has to be taken. Now, if you actually work for the organization and you're the organization, you're doing the internal audit on behalf of the organization you're employed with, I would specify whatever works best for you. Like Barney Fife said, nip it in the bud. If you come across a finding, go ahead and record it as a nonconformance. As an assessor for your external, doing your external audit, of course, we can't consult, but perhaps you folks, if you're operating within your own organization, you have a finding, you see some corrective action which needed to be implemented as soon as possible, reported it to the relevant manager, and that's totally going to depend on the size of the organization, and then get the ball rolling. Might be best at the conclusion of the internal audit, inform the individuals of the finding, and then at the end of the internal audit, present the audit report, and as I recommended, separate reports for the nonconformances. I'm just scrolling down here. I think I accidentally skipped over a couple here. Somebody says you're getting my questions in real time. That's good, because like I said, when I signed off, I only had one. Now I have a list here. I have a question here. I'm not sure if I answer these the best I can. I'm not an expert in every area, of course. Recommendation. Is there a recommendation or training road path, career pathways for internal audit in a company? Please share a roadmap we can use to train future internal audits. Future internal auditors. So what I'm going to say here is no requirements, just sort of, I'm involved in PJLA. I can tell you, we offer public training. We offer, and we're getting a schedule together for 2018, where we will, we offer a 2-day full-blown internal auditors class. We go through the entire standard. Of course, we have case studies, group activities. It's very hands-on. We also offer a 1-day transitional course, which basically highlights the difference. Those folks that are versed in 2005, it highlights the key differences between the 2005 and the 2017 17025 standard. Our webinars, like I said, we have a wealth of information on our website, and I'm speaking to you as actually an employee of Perry Johnson. They're available on our website. They're a resource for you. So you can go back this year, and I've noticed have a lot more attendance than toward the tail end of 2017, where we were rehashing a lot of things, waiting for the standard to be revised. Has really increased. So they can be used as aids to help you with your internal auditor training. Right there on our website. By the time we're this time next year, we should be completely covered, I guess, on the entire 17025 2017 standard. What is appropriate time for closing campus? As speaking in behalf of PJLA, we specify 60 days we need to have our corrective actions closed. You as an internal auditor, one thing I emphasize in good practices, if the corrective action, let's say, for example, it was directly related to your testing and calibration activities, your results. Let's say you had equipment that's operating out of predefined limits and it's being recorded and being used. You want to take corrective action immediately in those cases. You want to take correction, of course. You want to take that piece of equipment out of service. You're going to stop it at that point. Then you're going to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So if you have, say you have equipment that was operating incorrectly and was clearly, you had quality checks and was outside of predefined limits. I'm just throwing an example here. And if I was part of your organization, I would give those things top priority. Let's say if it was a issue, let's say, for example, your master documents list is something, it's not required in 2017, but I'm finding a lot of folks are still using that to control their documents. So in the course of that, perhaps you found an external document, one of our policies and procedures, say PL1, that was revised and it wasn't updated on your master documents. That's not going to directly impact your testing and calibration works, but appropriate corrective action would need to be taken. So as far as a recommendation, I would go back to what we do at PJLA, 60 days max. And you want to ensure it's not going to happen again. So you want to do a good root cause. Why did it happen? However you do that, 5 whys, and put good corrective action in place. Can we have access to this webinar? Yep, right after, hopefully very shortly afterwards. And I did mention this at the beginning of the broadcast. On our website, we have a toolbox at the top, webinars, and it has a schedule of upcoming webinars, and there's also a place for past webinars. So this one I did last month is already there on management reviews. Dates back several years. So yes, this will be available. Okay, bear with me. I'm going to go through this list again, see if I missed anything. And I'm reading this. I'm really not sure what this question is asking me. Specifically, new analyst, new methods versus experienced analyst, and no problem from external audits. Not sure exactly what's being asked there. Specifically, new analysts, new methods versus experienced analysts, and no problems from external audits. I'm assuming if you have a well-defined system in place, your methods are intact, you have an experienced staff. As far as auditing those specific sections of the standard, perhaps your predefined schedule is being asked there. You still need to audit it regardless of whether or not your staff this season well versed in the methods. You still should go and look at the objective evidence that compliance has been met. One thing, and it's a new requirement in the standard under personnel, records for personnel, regardless if they're been there 6 months or they've been there 20 years, is there's a new requirement, and you're going to be auditing this, is you have to have records of monitoring personnel. So regardless of how seasoned your staff is and how versed they are in the established methods, there is a new requirement concerning the monitoring of their performance. So however you elect to do that, i.e. through proficiency testing, checking their work, those sorts of things, that is a new requirement which would need to be looked at regardless of how seasoned the staff is and how well established your method is. I'm not real sure I understand the question. I'm gathering that that is what's being asked there. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think that concludes. Let me go back to the bottom here. Okay, that appears to be the end of the questions here. So before I sign off, we already got next month's webinar scheduled. Currently, it is scheduled for December 20th, which we're getting real close to the holidays there. Believe it or not, that's the end of the year. Time has really flown. So next month, we're going to combine a couple sections, section 6.3 and 6.4. 6.3 on facilities and environmental conditions, along with section 6.4 on equipment. Again, if you like a copy of the presentation, I'm going to correct the error on the slides as far as the title and the overall section being 8.8 instead of 8.7. M. Kramer, Kramer, at pjlabs.com. And in the subject line, put webinar in the subject line, and I will send you that attachment. This recorded version will be available. So in concluding, I want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving. And I look forward to having you all log in on December 20th. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.